I felt it before I saw it. The eerie sensation of being watched. I turned my head, and there he was, Edmund, my 19-year-old stepson, standing by the laundry basket, holding something in his hands. Something that made my stomach drop. My underwear. Still damp. His fingers pressed into the fabric like he was memorizing the texture. Like he was savoring it. I should have screamed. I should have yanked it away, told him he was sick, thrown him out of the house. Anything but stand there, frozen, breath shallow, heat rising in my chest. Because I wasn't just horrified, I was exposed. For years, I'd feared that my husband Alistair would find out. He'd finally noticed the extra panties I threw away, the damp sheets I blamed on spilled tea, the way I always showered before he touched me. Urinary incontinence. 2 words that had stripped away every ounce of confidence I had as a woman. I had spent years hiding. And yet, in front of me, this boy was looking at the part of me I hated most. And he didn't turn away. He lifted the fabric to his face, breathing in deep, eyes fluttering shut. I staggered back, my heel catching on the tile. He jerked up, locking eyes with me. We stood there, trapped in a moment we both knew we could never undo. And the worst part? I wasn't disgusted. I was wanted. Have you ever felt ashamed of a personal issue? How did it affect your relationships? Let us know in the comments. And before we continue, take a moment out of your precious time to support this channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. The days passed as if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't caught Edmund standing there. His fingers pressed into my most shameful secret as if my world hadn't tilted in a way that could never be undone. I tried to shake it off. I had to. I wasn't the type of woman to get stuck in a fleeting moment. Especially not a moment like that. So I buried myself in chores, scrubbing, folding, organizing, anything to distract from the way my stomach clenched whenever I caught a glimpse of him. But no matter how hard I worked, I couldn't wash away what I'd seen in his eyes that night. And I knew deep down that he hadn't forgotten either. That evening, the house was eerily quiet. Alistair was working late again. The dining table sat untouched, his plate still covered in the food I had carefully prepared, now cold and forgotten. I had just finished folding the last pile of laundry when I felt it, his presence. Edmund stood beside me, silent at first, then reaching down to help me smooth out a shirt. "Did you even eat?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. I shook my head, folding the last towel with more force than necessary. "Not hungry." A pause. Then, "You never eat when he's late." I stiffened. "That's not true." "You say that every time," he murmured, neatly stacking the folded clothes. "But I see it." A lump formed in my throat. I hated how observant he was. We settled into quiet conversation after that, talking about mundane things, the broken heater, his college assignments, the neighbor's yappy dog, just enough to keep the air light. Just enough to pretend nothing had changed. But then, as if pulled by some unseen force, he changed the subject. "Do you still feel ashamed?" I froze, my fingers gripping the edge of the laundry basket. "Edmund." "You don't have to be," he interrupted, his voice low, careful. His hand brushed mine, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver up my spine. I swallowed hard, my pulse thundering in my ears. "You don't understand." "But I do." He turned fully toward me now, his gaze steady, unshaken. "I know how it makes you feel. Like you're broken," I whispered before I could stop myself. He nodded slowly. "But you're not." I wanted to laugh. Wanted to tell him how ridiculous he sounded, that he had no idea what it was like to be a woman who felt less. But the words wouldn't come. Because for the first time, someone was looking at me and not seeing the flaw. He was seeing me. The air between us grew thick, weighted. He reached for another shirt from the pile, but his fingers trembled. I should have stepped away. Should have ended it before it started. But instead, I stayed. And then it happened. A kiss. Hesitant at first, uncertain. His lips barely grazed mine, giving me a chance to pull away. But I didn't. The hesitation melted, giving way to something deeper. His hands found my waist, gripping tight as if anchoring himself to me. As if I was something worth holding on to. My mind screamed to stop. This was wrong. Unforgivable. I had a husband upstairs. A marriage. A life I had built, even if the foundation had long since cracked. But my body didn't listen. I clung to him, fingers tangled in his shirt, drowning in the sensation of being wanted. Of being touched without fear, without shame. For the first time in years, I felt like a woman. Not a wife. Not a burden. Just a woman. When we finally pulled away, we were both breathless, staring at each other like we had just stepped off the edge of a cliff. "This can't happen again," I whispered. He didn't argue. Because we both knew it would. The days blended into one another, each marked by the same routines, the same silences. Alistair's late returns had become the norm, his excuses predictable. I would sit across from him at the dinner table, watching him eat the meal I'd prepared hours earlier, his mind elsewhere. In those moments, I felt the weight of my secret pressing down on me. The constant anxiety of my condition, urinary incontinence, was a silent torment. Each unexpected leak was a cruel reminder of my body's betrayal, eroding my confidence and self-worth. I feared Alistair's reaction if he discovered the truth. Would he see me as less of a woman? Would he turn away in disgust or pity? These thoughts haunted me, deepening the isolation I felt within my own home. But with Edmund, things were different. Our late-night conversations had become my refuge, a space where I could momentarily shed the facade of composure and be vulnerable. We never planned these encounters. They simply happened, as if drawn together by an unspoken understanding. One evening, as the house lay in its usual quiet, I found myself in the library, a glass of untouched wine in hand. The fire's glow cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an ambience both intimate and unsettling. Edmund entered silently, his presence both a comfort and a challenge to my resolve. "You seem distant tonight," he observed, settling into the chair opposite mine. I offered a weak smile, unable to meet his gaze. "Just tired, I suppose." He leaned forward, concern evident in his eyes. "It's more than that. What's troubling you?" The dam I'd carefully constructed around my emotions began to crack. The weight of my secret, the fear of judgment, and the longing for acceptance surged within me. Tears welled up, blurring my vision. "I've been so scared," I confessed, my voice trembling. "Scared that Alistair would see me as less of a woman. That he'd leave if he knew." Edmund's expression softened, and he moved to sit beside me, his proximity both comforting and dangerous. He gently cupped my face, his touch warm and reassuring. "I want you," he whispered, his voice filled with sincerity. "All of you." His words pierced through the layers of insecurity and fear that had enveloped me for so long. In that moment I felt seen, not as a flawed woman, but as a whole person deserving of love and desire. The space between us disappeared as our lips met in a kiss that was both tender and fervent. It was a union born not just of physical desire, but of a deep emotional connection that had been forged in the shadows of our shared vulnerabilities. As we parted, breathless and trembling, I rested my forehead against his, a mixture of relief and apprehension coursing through me. Secrets are like cracks in a dam, silent at first, until they spread, splinter, and finally give way. I had been careful, or at least I thought I had. Every glance, every lingering touch, every stolen breath shared behind locked doors had been concealed beneath the veil of routine. But deceit is never truly invisible. It started with a misplaced text. A foolish mistake. A simple good night, my love sent to the wrong number. Alistair's instead of Edmund's. I realized it too late, the moment my phone buzzed in my hand with his response. "Laura, what is this?" The blood drained from my face. My hands trembled. I told myself there was a way out. A lie I could craft. A story I could spin. But something in me knew the truth had already taken root. That evening, the air inside our home had weight. Thick, oppressive, waiting to collapse. I had prepared dinner, setting the table as always, but my hands shook as I laid out the plates. The front door opened, and there he was. Alistair. His eyes were not the eyes of a husband returning home to his wife, but those of a man who had seen something he could never unsee. He didn't remove his coat. Didn't set down his briefcase. He simply stood there, staring at me. "How long, Laura?" His voice was steady, but there was something raw beneath it, something that made my stomach twist. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as dust. I wanted to speak, to tell him something. Anything, but my lips wouldn't move. The walls of the room closed in. The flickering candlelight on the table suddenly seemed garish, obscene, as though illuminating the filth of what I had done. Then Edmund stepped forward. "Dad, Shut up." Alistair's voice was a thunderclap, rattling the air between us. The force of it sent a chill through my bones. Edmund froze. I had never seen fear in his eyes before. Not like this. The weight of his father's rage bore down on him like a physical thing. Alistair's fists clenched at his sides, his body rigid with something beyond fury, beyond betrayal. "You!" He turned to me now, his face contorted. "With him." I could hear his breath, uneven, ragged. I could see his chest rising and falling as if he had run miles just to land at this moment. Guilt was a noose tightening around my throat. There were no words that could fix this. No justification. No defense. The room held its breath. "Did you ever love me?" Alistair's voice was quieter now, but that made it worse. I opened my mouth, but the words refused to come. Because the answer wasn't simple. Because love and loneliness can coexist. Because shame had sunk its claws too deep for me to untangle what I felt. His eyes darted to Edmund, then back to me, as if seeing the two of us standing together made him physically ill. His jaw tightened, his fingers twitching at his sides. The silence between us stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, like a fracture splitting through glass, Alistair exhaled, a breath laced with something that was no longer anger but something else entirely. Resignation? He stepped back. Not toward me. Not toward Edmund. But away. "This marriage," he said, his voice hollow, "was a lie." And then he turned and walked away. Alistair was gone. A suitcase packed in silence. A door slammed so hard the walls trembled. I stood in the hallway long after he had left, staring at the space where he had stood, listening to the hollow echo of his absence. The air smelled of his cologne, of the life we had built together, one I had taken an axe to with trembling hands. Edmund stayed. For now. But the house felt different. The weight of what we had done hung in the air, no longer thrilling, no longer hidden in stolen moments and whispered confessions. The fantasy had shattered, leaving only jagged edges that cut deep whenever I let myself think too long. He tried to reach for me that night, pressing a hand against my back as I lay stiff in bed. The same touch that once sent heat pooling in my stomach now felt foreign. I didn't pull away, but I didn't lean into him either. "Are you okay?" he murmured. I closed my eyes. What did okay even mean anymore? I didn't sleep. Hours bled into one another as I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the night. Somewhere, an old pipe groaned in the walls. The wind rattled the trees outside. The world moved on, indifferent to the ruin I had made of my life. Then my phone buzzed. The screen lit up. A message. Blocked number. No name. I hope he was worth it. My breath caught. I read it again. And again. My fingers tightened around the phone, knuckles white. My stomach twisted itself into knots. The words were simple, but they carried weight. A blade against my skin. Was this? I had sacrificed everything. My marriage, my reputation, the security of a life I had spent years building, for the heat of forbidden desire. But that heat had faded, and all that remained was the cold reality of what I had done. I glanced at Edmund, his chest rising and falling in the dim light. He looked peaceful, unbothered. But for how long? The moment would come when even he would realize that what we had wasn't love. It was an escape. A desperate grasp for something we were never meant to hold. I turned back to my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. A reply? A denial? An apology? Instead, I set it down and curled onto my side. Sleep never came. Because the truth was, I already knew the answer. And that brings us to the end of this story. But before you go, let's take a moment to reflect. Life is filled with choices. Some made in moments of weakness, others in desperate longing. But every choice has a price. Was it worth it? That's for you to decide. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever found yourself caught between desire and consequence? Would you risk everything for a feeling you can't explain? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more content like this your way. And if you never want to miss a video, turn on the notification bell. Until next time, stay thoughtful, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay honest with yourself.